Hello everyone, and welcome to my 100th video that I've ever uploaded to YouTube. Since this is my 100th video, I decided to do something special this time and just make a tier list of all the Fire Emblem games. You can see all the games that I'm going to be tiering here, and these are what the tiers are going to be. I'm going to be tiering these games in release order. This video is just my opinion on what I think of each Fire Emblem game. I'm gonna probably try and go through this pretty quickly because when it comes to Fire Emblem, like, I really love the gameplay in like almost all these games, so you know there's not much I'm gonna really have to say. I'm kind of tiering mostly based off of 4 categories, which is characters, story, music, gameplay, and whatchamacallit, like, I guess I should say art direction. With that being said, we're gonna start with the first game, which is the first Fire Emblem, and that's gonna be an easy go into bad tier. This is the worst Fire Emblem game in the series, primarily because of how dated it is. It's been remade twice, so if you're really interested in playing Marth's first story, just play one of the 2 remakes. This game is just super clunky. It's so clunky and like difficult to menu through and get through that, you know, it's just not fun to play. And you know, for a game where menuing is like so important to like everything that goes on, you know, it's just like almost an unforgivable sin in some respects. It's just so slow to play. You could just play better versions of it, and like it's hard to even talk about other aspects of the game because it's just a slog to even try and play this game. So you know, that's like the big reason why I say that this is just the worst Fire Emblem game. Like, it's not even worth trying to talk about the other features of it. It's just trying to play the game in and of itself is a chore. With that said, next we move on to Fire Emblem Gaiden, and that is going to be the only other game that I'm going to put into bad tier. Fire Emblem Gaiden fixes some of the menu clunkiness that's in this, you know, the original Fire Emblem game, that makes it a bit more playable. But it's very RNG heavy in terms of like clearing the game. Sometimes, like, you know, in my Iron Man series, I have a video where I end up having to fight a shaman in a fort, and that video is probably 40 minutes long, with like 30 minutes of it just being me trying to fight that shaman in the desert fort map, just because of how slow the game can go and how annoying it can be. And it's just not a fun. It's like, there are things about Gaiden that's like really fun. Like, I would say chapter 1 in particular is very enjoyable. But after that, like, once shamans start to get introduced, the game just starts to go downhill because it just becomes very slow to play and very clunky. And a lot of the map design in Celica's route in particular is just very bad. And if it wasn't for the Pegasus sisters being in this game, you know, I don't think anyone would have the patience to beat Celica's route anymore. It's just way too slow. With that being said, we're going to move on to the Super Nintendo era now, and we're going to start with Book 3. Or I should say Fire Emblem 3 Mystery of the Emblem, which is split into Book 1 and Book 2. I'm going to put this game in good for a couple of reasons. For starters, it's 2 games in 1, which in and of itself, you know, especially for a SNES game, is pretty incredible. You know, you can hear from the background that I like the music because I picked the music from this game. It's just a huge improvement over the first 2 Fire Emblem games. This is the game that really put Fire Emblem on the map, especially in Japan. It's why you have people who like characters like, you know, Ogma and Merrick and all those people. It's just because of this game. This is like the game that's really Fire Emblem's, you know, true start as a franchise, in my opinion. It's this one. You know, it's just an improvement over the previous 2 games in like every single one of the categories that I mentioned. It's the first game where you really start to see characters get a bit more, you know, characterization, more so in Book 2 than in Book 1. But you know, the story overall for the whole saga is pretty solid. The artwork is a big improvement over the previous 2 games, even if it's still lacking compared to future games. But you know, definitely, you know, pretty solid game. So next we're going to move on to Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, aka FE4, and that's obviously going to go into Masterpiece. It has the best story of any Fire Emblem game in my opinion, though the story does fall off a bit in part 2. It's the first game in the series to really feature support conversations and real character development for a lot of the characters. A lot of the gameplay mechanics that are introduced in terms of like how stats are calculated, in terms of like things like hit rate and avoid. A lot of that like really starts to get its start from this game. It's the game that introduced the weapon triangle, even though the weapon triangle isn't really all that great in this game except for when swords fight axes. The main flaws that I would say this game has is that the maps are too big, and that mounted units are just so much more unbalanced compared to foot units. But it's a great game. Like, some of the best music, great story. Was the first game to really start to do stuff to differentiate your playable characters from each other than them all using the same generic sprites, except for your lord, or some characters like Merrick and Linde got their own, well, not really so much Linde, but Merrick got like his own animations and stuff like that. So this is definitely a masterpiece for as far as Fire Emblem is concerned. Next, we're gonna have Fire Emblem 3C776, and I'm gonna put this in average. This is the last game, I believe, that the original creator of Fire Emblem, Shozo Kaga, worked on. This game's main problem is that there's a lot of just difficulty to this game that people, I think, usually refer to, especially with older games, as just Nintendo difficulty. And that's where it's like the difficulty isn't really like kind of fair, and you need like a guide to like really get through it. It's probably not even Nintendo difficulty. I think it's like old school Nintendo difficulty, but it's just like stuff like that really keeps the game down, like from being considered all that great when you think about it. Like, there are two maps in particular three maps I should say in particular when it comes to this game that are just really unfair for the player when compared to other ones. One is the map where you have to recruit Xavier. Xavier's recruitment is just the worst and most difficult thing to do in the entire series, and a big problem, like reason for that in my opinion, is because of the map design of the map where you have to recruit him. They're just small tweaks that they could have done to make it a bit easier, but they ended up not doing that, so it makes it harder. You have stuff like the map where you finally fight Reinhardt, where when the bridge disappears, like, you're kind of screwed in terms of trying to get units over the bridge. So that all contributes to like some of the problems. And obviously, if 24X, I'm sure if you made a list of like what the top 5 worst Fire Emblem maps in the franchise are, 24X would show up on it. The desert map from Gaiden would show up on it. It would probably be just a bunch of maps from Gaiden, and then the 24X from Thracia as like the worst maps in the franchise. But that kind of ends the Kaga era of Fire Emblem, because I'm pretty sure that's the last game he worked on. So next we start into the more modern era. But before that, we have the BS Fire Emblem game. I haven't played this game. I believe it is translated for people who do want to play it, and obviously, like, New Mystery of the Emblem re-implemented it if you want to play that too. I've never played it. I will say the art style for like the sprite work is pretty good in this game. Next, we're going to have the Binding Blade, and I'm going to put that in average over Thracia. This game is the most difficult of the GBA games, and it set the standard for what GBA Fire Emblem is like. The sprites are fantastic. It's the GBA games are probably the best looking Fire Emblem games overall, if you ask me. The main problems that I'll say I'll have with Binding Blade is that the music for all the GBA games I don't think is very good. The story in this game is kind of meh. The gameplay, like the main flaw with the gameplay for Binding Blade is that the weapon accuracies are very bad, and it contributes to the game just being kind of a chore sometimes. Sometimes I think like a simple thing you could really just do to make this game much better is just give it the FE7 items, like in terms of like their stats, to make things a bit more fair. But otherwise, like, of the GBA games, like, this is the most challenging and difficult and like fun from a strategy perspective, but there's other things about it that I think bring it down to just bring it to being average. And in some respects, like, it's kind of fair to have these two games next to each other because they're very similar. Another problem that this game has that a lot of people point out is that this game is essentially just a redux of Marth's games. Like, at the beginning of the game, you start off with kind of the same units. You have the red and green Christmas Cavaliers, you have your Jagan, you have an archer like Will. The only thing you're kind of missing is a Pegasus Knight, but you get one in the second chapter. Next, we're gonna have Fire Emblem 7. This I'm gonna put in good tier. This is probably the best game in my opinion to start the franchise from. because Lynn's mode, which is the tutorial, is just the flat-out best tutorial for Fire Emblem in the series. Like, anytime I've like done the other tutorial modes for later games just for fun, they never really match the level of quality and just, you know, good execution that, you know, Lynn's version has. Otherwise, like, the story isn't really anything special. I know YouTuber Mecha made a very long and well done and thought out review to like kind of go over like the seriousness of like why the story in this is bad. But otherwise, it's, you know, other than it being a bit easier than Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, it's an improvement over in other areas. Like, there's a lot of content to the game. It fixes some of the problems with the gameplay in terms of like, you know, weapons and things like that. The support system in this game is also a bit more expansive, because I think you can gain more support points per chapter than this one, but supports are kind of a, you know, overpowered feature that benefit the player more. That being said, next we have Sacred Stones, and this is another game I'm going to put kind of at the bottom of average. Sacred Stones, like, it has a very tight-knit cast, and the story is probably a bit better than like these three games here, you know, Fire Emblem 7, 6, and 5. But the gameplay is just very easy, you know, even though it has like so many, you know, different classes because of class branching in this game, you don't really get enough units to, I think, like, explore as much of it as you would like, or as I would like, I should say, since this is, you know, my list. And the music is, I think, a bit of a letdown between these ones. It's just, you know, this is the average tier, so this is where I think most Fire Emblem games should ultimately end up, and that's kind of what this game is. It's just average. You know, the branching paths for the two characters is pretty interesting. It builds off what you saw here, but the game just isn't as strategically challenging as the previous two. You know, it's kind of like just a better version of Fire Emblem Gaiden in some regards because of like the monsters and things like that. But, you know, that's my opinion on Sacred Stones. If you do like Fire Emblem hacking, obviously you would hack Sacred Stones, though. That's the one that has the most support these days. Next we have Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. That's gonna go into Masterpiece. This has the second best story of any Fire Emblem game. It has probably it has easily the best lore of story-wise of any Fire Emblem game. Like, it's really like, you know, just Ike's journey. Pretty good music. It's the first 3D Fire Emblem game, so the graphics generally aren't regarded very well, and the battles, like the 3D battles, are pretty slow. And it's also a bit on the easy side, but there's a lot of like mechanics and stuff that are in this game that allow it to like lift itself up and be a bit more fun than, you know, some of these other games here. You know, just great characters, great story, gameplay that's like kind of equal to the GBA era. Except it's, you know, it's a bit easier, and just great character design, great story. You know, I already said great story. It's just all around a really good game. I think it being a bit on the easy side is the only thing that falls it back. And then some people might point out, oh well, it has, you know, maddening mode, but maddening mode, you know, which is a Japanese version of the game exclusive, is pretty imbalanced in terms of like how high enemy defense kind of gets. With that being said, then we have Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. This is a game I'm gonna put kind of at the bottom of good. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of good. This game is really fun in terms of like how the map design works and like what you do. The main reason I'm kind of placing it here is because, you know, some of these other games like give you a lot, like the unit balance in this game is really bad because of the Lagoos. Like, the Lagoos are either just like overpowered through the royals, where you want to use pretty much like all of them, or you just have the regular Lagoos where they're just generally just not that useful. I didn't even talk about the Lagoos up here, because the Lagoos up here, like, you know, there's some like Leith and Janaf who just transform instantly, you know, but there's nothing to really kind of talk about them here. It's in this game where their imbalance is a lot more present because the Lagoos Royals are more present in the game. Yeah, the music in this game is pretty good, but I think the thing that holds it back when compared to the games above it, even though the gameplay is really good, is just the story is bad. The unit flexibility is a bit on the low side, even though skills can be switched around a lot. And it just, like, there's things about it just feel like kind of a disappointment after how epic so to say, the previous game was. Next we have Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. That I'm gonna put here in average. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon is like, you didn't really see a lot of talk about it back in the day, but this is, like, in my opinion, the real most controversial Fire Emblem game in the series, because this game removed a ton of features that were like staples from past Fire Emblem games. Like, it had no support system. The graphics were a massive just drop in quality. The story was really bare bones. The gameplay was really just way too similar to kind of the original one. It implements the weapon triangle in a game where many enemies just don't use axes past the early game, and there's so many lance users, and then you don't get enough axe users to really counter the lance users, and just reclassing wasn't implemented well. I mean, this game, because of all the difficulty modes this has, that's kind of the only reason I kind of want to rate it higher than Sacred Stones. But otherwise, this is, I mean, it's just because of the replayability, I'm kind of going to put it above Sacred Stones, because, I'm one of the people who thinks reclassing was actually a really great feature, and because of what it would allow you to do if you wanted to play the game more and more, and then there are all the gameplay features. But otherwise, like, this is a really, like, unpolished Fire Emblem game, to the point where I really think I should just, I'm gonna put it under Sacred Stones. Like, don't get me wrong, like, this is average, so all the Fire Emblem games in here I would say are, like, fun and worth playing, but it has, like, a lot of flaws compared to the other ones. It does have a lot of replayability, though. So then we have New Mystery of the Emblem. So New Mystery of the Emblem essentially takes a lot of the problems with the DS games and just flat out fixes them. It's one of the most difficult Fire Emblem games in the franchise. On the hardest difficulty. I think some people would say that the reverse lunatic mode of this game is the hardest difficulty of any Fire Emblem game. It takes the story of Book 2 and kind of damages it a bit by giving a lot of what Jagan does to the Avatar character, in addition to being the first game with the Avatar character. But it just takes a lot of the stuff that Shadow Dragon had, like, kind of refines it and just makes the game much more enjoyable to play. It's kind of disappointing it was never released in the West. That's just how it goes sometimes. Okay, so with that said, now we're going to be in the 3DS era of Fire Emblem games. And we're going to start with Fire Emblem Awakening. And Fire Emblem Awakening is a game that I am going to put, probably a bit controversially, at the top of good. The main problems I would say Fire Emblem Awakening has is that the graphics are a bit lackluster, and the story isn't all that fantastic. It ranges from just being pretty average to being, with like the first arc, to being pointless with like the Valm arc, to the final arc just being whatever. And then there are problems with gameplay balance in terms of the Avatar character's veteran skill being broken and things like that. But there's so much to like this game that just makes it like so much fun to play, especially if you like try and do challenge runs, because there's just so much you can do with this game. Like, you could play the game without using pair up, you could play the game without using second seals, you could play the game without using veteran and Nosferatu, and if you do stuff like that, the difficulty of like how you play the game can just spike, and you can see like how amazing pair up can be to like ferry your units around the map. There's a lot of stuff that you can do for like making child characters. The DLC for this game for this game is actually pretty good. It's just a very expansive Fire Emblem game with a ton of content, a ton of stuff you can do. Me putting it so high up here is probably pretty controversial to me. Like, there's just so much stuff you can do with this game that just seems like so much more eye-opening and like easier to like see that you would do when compared to other Fire Emblem games. Next we're gonna have Fire Emblem Birthright. This time I put it's at average. It essentially takes like what Awakening had and like dumbs down some of it, but it introduces like some new items and stuff like that that can make the game pretty fun. The story for Birthright is the best of the three for Fire Emblem Fates. Yeah, but with that being said, the gameplay in Fates is just much easier than Awakening. You feel it's a shorter game because it's designed with it being like, oh, you're gonna play Conquest and Revelations 2. The characters aren't as good as they are in Awakening. It's really hard to like because putting Birthright here and Awakening there, like, even to me, like, looking at this is kind of hard to justify, but it's just, like, there's just stuff in Fire Emblem Awakening that I feel is just better designed in terms of the gameplay in maps that Birthright is just missing. Next, we're gonna have Conquest. Conquest is a very hard game to tier, and I'm gonna put it kind of at the bottom of good. Conquest has the best gameplay of any Fire Emblem game. There's really only one other Fire Emblem game that I would say matches it, and I'm just noticing that this tier list doesn't have that Fire Emblem game, which I guess goes to say a lot about that Fire Emblem game, with that Fire Emblem being Fire Emblem Engage. Fire Emblem Engage, since I'm noticing, isn't here. I'm just gonna say this right now, it's in the haven't finished section, same with Fire Emblem Warriors. But I'll put that back for right now, for when I, get there. Yeah, so Conquest, the only other Fire Emblem game that I think matches it in terms of gameplay is Engage. The story is terrible, the music is really good, to the point where you'll play certain maps, and it's like, the music is so good, and the story dealing with the map you're on does not match the quality of the music. I feel kind of dumb putting a game with, like, gameplay this good, like, so far down the list, but it's just, the story is just so bad for this game, and the characters, like, just aren't as good as they are in, like, some of the other Fire Emblem games. Then next we have Revelations. Revelations is the only other Fire Emblem game I would consider putting in bad. The only reason I'm not going to put it in bad is just because it has some features and redeeming qualities to it that can make it better than these games, but the primary problem with Fire Emblem Revelations is that the story is terrible, and the map design is just bad for a lot of the maps. It's just that this game is still, at the end of the day, playable. It's definitely not as good as a lot of the other games on this list, but it's not anywhere close to being as bad as these two. This is essentially like a game that, the only reason isn't in bad tier is just because it has some redeeming qualities to it. Otherwise I don't have much more to kind of add about it. It's just bad map design. Same, good music, good artwork, good graphics, in my opinion, for a 3DS game like Birthright and Conquest, but it doesn't have as good of gameplay, and it doesn't feel like there's as much to do in it as there is in Awakening. Next, we're gonna have Fire Emblem Echoes. That I'm gonna put an average, probably right here. This is probably this is another, like, really beautiful looking Fire Emblem game with great music, but the primary problem this game has is that it's still just Fire Emblem Gaiden at its core. And while Fire Emblem Gaiden has, like, some fun stuff to it, like, I'd love to see exploration in another Fire Emblem game, it just being Fire Emblem Gaiden at the end of the day really just holds it back. So with that being said, now we're gonna move on to, the end of the 3DS era into the Switch era, and I'm just gonna put some games here. Fire Emblem Warriors I haven't finished. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes I own, but I still haven't played it yet. Tokyo Mirage Sessions is also haven't finished. I got this game on the Wii U, and then I got the Switch version. So the Switch version I haven't played yet. Fire Emblem Engage is also just gonna go into haven't finished. Like, Fire Emblem Engage I like, but it's just, the story is really bad, and a lot of the guiding chapters just take a long time, and it just goes on. If Fire Emblem Engage was, like, on this list, I would probably put it right under Conquest. So with that being said, the other games we have here, the DLC for Fire Emblem Three Houses, that's average. I'm gonna put it above these two, Fates, but the DLC, like, because it's the DLC story and it's listed here, like, it's nothing really to write home about. Fire Emblem Three Houses would be the next one. That I will put here. Fire Emblem Three Houses has, like, a really good story. The characters and their interactions is, like, really well done, but the gameplay to it has, like, a lot of flaws. Like, I love the way the combat arts and battalions work, but and especially, like, the class changing system and stuff like that, but it's, like, also a game that's just really easy to break, like Fire Emblem Awakening. And the game doesn't have a very large cast of characters, so there's some, like, limits to, like, what you're allowed to do. I kind of feel like I should put it over Awakening, just because the story is, at least in this game, is better. Though I do find Awakening, I think, at the end of the day, to be tiny bit more fun to play, because Awakening, like, a lot of people like say Awakening has bad map design. I really don't agree with that. Like, Awakening has some maps that are like pretty good and pretty fun to play, that require some pretty good strategy depending on how you approach them. And Fire Emblem Three Houses, I don't think really ever has that. Like, Fire Emblem Three Houses is really hurt by its map design, and Engage thankfully like showed like, yeah, you know, IS can still make some good map design. The last game that's on this list, and this is going to be the most controversial thing that I do, but it's Fire Emblem Heroes, and I'm going to put that in Masterpiece. And the reason I'm going to put Fire Emblem Heroes in Masterpiece is, one, for a mobile gacha game, like, this is one of the best mobile gacha games out there. Like, you don't need to spend any money to like play it. Like, yeah, the story is bad, but the maps for the games, like, even though it's more like puzzle, you know, puzzle-like than the other Fire Emblem games, it's just really fun. Like, this game has the most content of like any Fire Emblem game in terms of like how it's just designed and built. And even though, like, you know, it has PvP that's like pretty good. I'm not even like a huge Fire Emblem Heroes person. It's just, you know, from a lot of the time that I've spent playing, like, you know, mobile games and stuff like that, and just like comparing it to like other mobile games out there, comparing to like the content that it has in it, it's just this, like, a really solid, you know, game. Like, I can understand like people wouldn't like it compared to the other games. Like, it doesn't have as much depth to these games, but, you know, it's so good for like what they're trying to do with it. You know, for a mobile game where you can beat and like enjoy it without using any money, like the level of strategy that you're free to implement in this game, it's just like, it just takes like the sandbox elements of games like Fire Emblem Awakening or Three Houses or Engage or the 3DS, you know, or Fates, and just dials it to 11. And there's just so much you can do, and you have so much freedom. Like, yeah, you're gonna be like, oh, you have to actually get the units to you know, through the gacha to get them. I know this is really controversial, but this game is really like, yeah, like, this is definitely the most controversial thing that I'm putting, and I've said that so many times now in this one thing, but it's just so like special when compared to some of these other games. Like, yes, the story is bad, the music is, you know, largely taken from the other games, so you can make of it what you will. The art places all over the place because of the designs, but you just have so much freedom with this game compared to other games. Like, I feel like I just kind of have to put it in Masterpiece, or at the very least like very high and good. But the reason I'm gonna leave it in Masterpiece is just because, like, it's a mobile game, and because of what it does for mobile games, and especially when compared to other mobile games. Like, Fire Emblem Heroes is really solid. Like, of all the Fire Emblem games here, I mean, it doesn't help that it helps this game that it gets updated more than the other ones. Like, this is probably the Fire Emblem game I've played the most. But again, I'm not really saying that like because this game is like better or more fun to play. I mean, I guess I am if I'm saying it's a masterpiece, but I'm really putting this here just because it's a mobile game and because of how good of a mobile game it is. Yeah, so like I said, this list doesn't have Engage, which I didn't really notice at first when I was doing this, but Engage would be in haven't finished. If I did finish it, I would probably put it either at the very top of average or under Conquest, which would mean that these two tiers ended up having the same amount of games in them. But, you know, I guess you could say the bad games, well, they're more masterpieces. I don't know, if I was gonna put games in average, I'd probably put Fire Emblem Warriors and Tokyo Mirage Sessions in average too. But anyway, that's my opinion on the Fire Emblem games. Three Houses being a masterpiece is probably the most controversial thing, and I probably don't have a very good defense for it, other than me just saying, like, it's a mobile game that just manages to be, like, this special. So, yeah, that's it for this video. This is my 100th video, so thank you for your time, everyone. Hope you have a good day.